Chapter 551. Drizzle began falling from the somber sky. The candle flame danced along to the cold breeze. Olivia wiped the raindrop off her face, muttering, "Mona, is that you?" 2 drops of rain landed beneath Mona's eyes on the picture, making it seem as though she was crying. It broke Olivia's heart to see that. She caressed the gravestone. "Don't worry, Mona, I will take good care of your family. They are my family from now onward. Please rest in peace. In your next life, find a better person in your next life." The drizzle showered the whole village after the funeral. Instead of leaving immediately, she went to Mona's old residence. It had been a while since Mona's family moved to a big city. They would only return to their hometown during festive days like New Year's, so the house was usually empty. The house seemed to be shabby. The apple tree and grapevine trellis stood in the rain, seeped with loneliness. Olivia stood below the grapevine trellis. She could imagine an adorable girl eating apples on a hot summer evening. The little girl waved a fan while listening to the story of Orpheus and Eurydice from an older person. "This is Mona's favorite grape. It's a pity that she can't have them anymore." Alan recounted Mona's past story while standing beside Olivia. Olivia was listening to him attentively. There was a smile across her lips occasionally. "She sure is a mischievous kid." "Yeah, she's the most mischievous kid in this village. But she scores academically. That was why we moved to the city. Our parents worked hard to feed us. We thought that good days were ahead of us. Who knew?" She looked at his red eyes and patted his shoulder. "Don't cry. I'm your sister from now onward. Study hard. Don't disappoint her." "Okay." Olivia officially introduced herself to Mona's family. Since it was getting late, she decided to crash at the place for a night before leaving. She slept in Mona's room. Even Mona's bed sheet left traces of her past. The whole room was filled with the certificates of achievements she had received since she was young. Olivia listened to the rain as her back rested against Ethan's warm chest. He basically followed her everywhere she went, but she didn't mind it. When she was head over heels for him, he was the closest person to her. Now that her love had died, she merely saw him as a bodyguard. Olivia faced her back to him as usual. The old-fashioned light cast a warm yellow sheen over her face, but it couldn't stave off her coldness. Only coldness and moisture filled the silent room. Something was unfurling without anyone knowing. Ethan broke the silence. "Alan personally told me that he wishes to attend military school." Olivia turned around, furrowing her brows. "Military school? Doesn't he wanna go to medical school?" Mona had frequently mentioned her brother with pride. The glint in Ethan's eyes slightly wavered. "He shares the same notion as you, claiming that practicing medicine won't be able to save people." She sighed. "Fine, let him be." The following day, when Olivia and Ethan wanted to leave the place, an older woman with white hair visited. She was so old that her steps were wobbly. She hugged a colorful blanket in her arms. "Megan, your daughter previously asked me to patch a blanket. Do you still want it?" Megan wore an awkward expression. "Olivia, it was supposed to be a gift for you, but now." Olivia suppressed the pain ripping through her heart. "I want it. Why not? It's nice to have a souvenir." "Madam, here, I'll take it." "Okay." Mona kept reminding me to use fine threads and cloth to make it. "I personally dried the cotton. It's comfy and warm." "You." The older woman looked at Olivia, and her face fell. You're finally back." Chapter 552. Baffled, Olivia looked at Penny. Wrinkles adorned Penny's face, and her eyes were murky. Her wrinkle-surrounded mouth was shaking due to vehement emotions. "Mrs. Durst, are you speaking to me?" "Yes, you." The excited older woman held Olivia's hand, rubbing her rough hands against the back of Olivia's hand so much that it stung. Penny's reaction took Olivia aback. They didn't know each other, but why was Penny getting so excited? "Mrs. Durst, did you get the wrong person?" "How could I possibly get the wrong person? Miss, I've never expected myself to be able to meet you again. You look exactly the same as you were that year. You barely changed." Penny sized her up. "No, you seemed skinnier. Something's different about your face, too." Megan quickly said, "I think you got the wrong person. Olivia has never come to this village before. This is her first visit." "Olivia." Penny circled Olivia while pointing at her at times. Something's off. You're taller and skinnier than her. You look quite different, too. But you resemble her a lot. Olivia and Ethan exchanged glances, wondering if Penny knew her family. Have a seat and take your time to remember. Who do I resemble? Miss Nat. Olivia had never encountered that name before. Considering that Penny could be the only lead to find her real family, Olivia asked urgently, who is she? Where does she live? What kind of relationship do you have with her? Penny wanted to say something, but her mind went blank. She handed the blanket to Megan. Megan, your daughter's death is such a tragic one. She was such a nice kid. Mrs. Durst, you haven't told me who Miss Nat is yet. Penny turned to look at Olivia, only to be surprised again. Miss, you're back. Olivia was rendered speechless. Ethan patted her shoulder, providing comfort. She must be forgetful because of her age. Be patient. Megan added, yeah, she's in her 80s this year. Her hearing and eyesight are good, but she can be forgetful sometimes. Mom, does she have a family? No, her partner passed away a long time ago. She doesn't have kids, either. She has lived in the village since I was young. She never left this place once. Do you know her past? I don't know the details, but I heard something that happened 7 decades ago. Wars were on the rise at that time, hence the natural disasters and casualties. A lot of people died of starvation at the time. Many people went to the cities to work. She went to the city to work as a nanny for a rich family before. Olivia spoke to Penny for a while, realizing that the latter's circumstances weren't that good. Her memories would come and go, too. After discussing with Ethan, Olivia decided to bring Penny back to Aldenvine. Olivia could guess that she resembled Miss Nat, whom Penny had served before. She made a rough calculation of Miss Nat's age. Even if she were still alive, she would be at least as old as her own grandmother. They didn't return to the seaside villa. They went to a loft instead. Penny barely spoke throughout the journey back home. Nervousness and marvel filled her eyes. After 70 years, the country progressed into a developed country. There was no trace of its past at all. The moment they entered the house, warm air welcomed them. With her slightly hunched back, Penny stood respectfully in reflex. Welcome home, miss. Chapter 553. She could barely remember her name, but such etiquette was still etched deep in Penny's bones. Madam, make yourself at home. Let's talk inside. Olivia scanned the area casually. It was her first time coming to this loft. Ethan pointed at a nearby guest room. I asked Madame Burgess to clean that room. Mrs. Durst can stay there for the moment. If she lives under the same roof with you, she might be able to remember sooner. Okay, let her get used to the place for a few days. I'll ask someone to give her a thorough medical checkup after that. Thanks. Olivia had been giving him an aloof attitude as though they were neighbors. Ethan sighed helplessly, knowing that this would last for a while. You should get some rest, Liv. You're not fully recovered yet. From today onward, I'll ask someone to come over to treat your hand. As for your father, there's a medical team checking on him 24/7. Don't worry, nothing will happen. Olivia couldn't pick any fault out of his arrangements. It was a long journey traveling to Mona's hometown for her funeral. In addition to her restless sleep last night, Olivia felt exhausted. She informed Madame Burgess about something before returning to her room to get some rest. The sky was dark when she woke up. Ethan was working in the study room. Madame Burgess and Penny were getting along well as they started sewing souls together. Mrs. Durst, your eyesight is perfectly fine. You're in your 80s, and yet you can still sew perfectly. Not to toot my own horn, but I'm the best seamstress in the village. Back in the past, the villagers always handed their clothes to me. When I moved to the city, I started learning the trendy designs. Miss Nat the miss I served is pretty and young. The material and designs she wore were always the best, Penny claimed proudly. Olivia approached her. Mrs. Durst, where did you and Miss Nat live back then? No, 23, Warlot Street. Which Warlot Street? Could you be more specific? What is Miss Nat's actual name? Penny scratched her head. I can't remember. I'm old, and I can't remember a lot of things. I do remember that there was a huge cherry tree in the yard. When it was the season, Miss Nat would always pluck them herself. Then, we made cherry jam from them. Desserts are her favorite. What is her name? I don't know. Back then, I wandered along the streets with a group of refugees all the way from home. Life was hard. I was close to starvation. Miss Nat pitied me, so she brought me back. She was pregnant at that time. And I started looking after her. What about her husband? She never mentioned him. I asked a few times, but she didn't say anything. So, I didn't ask about him as time passed. I don't know where her origin was. Her accent wasn't local. She's the prettiest and most graceful woman I've ever met. What happened next? Where did Miss Nat go? Penny sighed. War was common during those years. I headed outside to buy her favorite sweets, but a war broke out in the city. The traitors massacred the city. Miss Nat and her son went missing. The valuables in the house were stolen. I was able to survive because I hid in a well. I searched for her for months, but there was no news of her. She might have been. After all, she was pretty. No man would let her go. She began recollecting her memories with Miss Nat, but there weren't many useful leads. After all, Penny was illiterate, and she came from a village. She didn't understand anything. That so-called Miss Nat was a mysterious woman. She was all alone with a kid, and her husband was nowhere to be seen. No one knew of her origin either. Olivia knew that she shouldn't rush things. She comforted Penny before going to the study, where Ethan was busy with his work. Olivia gave him the new leads. No.
23, Warlot Street. There was a huge cherry tree in the yard. Would you be able to find this place?
Chapter 554. Ethan's brows furrowed tightly. Which city? Mrs. Durst can't remember. She said that she wandered along the streets all the way from her hometown. She didn't have a place to go in mind. She followed others wandering around. I heard that her city was close to the sea. The country was tangled with wars over 60 years ago. Every military troop attacked everywhere to claim territories. There were countless bandits, too. The people formed organizations themselves to make riots. That period was chaotic. The place names kept changing. This alone won't be able to get us to the right place. It's all right. Take your time. I am happy enough to be able to meet Mrs. Durst. It can be considered as a guide from God. Who knows? She might be able to recall more things one day. Liv, it is true that we have leads. But you have to be mentally prepared. Even if you resemble Miss Nat, the person Mrs. Durst served, it is possible that this is a mere coincidence. It's common for people to look alike. Plus, that was 60 years ago. It might have nothing to do with your family. Ethan didn't want her to hold high hopes only to be utterly disappointed in the end. I understand. Please have the doctor come over for my hand treatment. Olivia touched her wrist. She was determined to treat her hand by all means. She didn't want to lose her hand. Every time Ethan saw her wrist, a weight of guilt shouldered on him. I heard that your medication dose has increased, and there are additional treatments. Can you handle them? Yeah, the new doctor is impressive. Olivia kept quiet about how painful the daily treatment was. In order to recover, she had to tolerate the pain no matter how hellish it felt. That was how the days passed. Everything seemed peaceful, but Ethan knew that Olivia had completely changed. He told her to get a good rest, but she spent a long time in the gym every day. Since her right hand hadn't recovered, she trained her left hand. After a month, she immediately requested special training from him. Brent followed behind him, looking at Olivia practicing female defensive skills through the window. It was bewildering since she was so thin and could only use one hand. When she was flipped over the trainer's shoulder again, the crease between Ethan's eyebrows tightened. Mr. Miller, Mrs. Miller just had a preterm delivery. I'm afraid she won't be able to take such strong training. She asked for it herself. During her 1-month rest, Olivia spent a long time on curl-ups and lifting barbells alone. This morning, she even tied sandbags on her legs while running. She was taking her body lightly. Ethan couldn't do anything about it. He said everything that he could, but she didn't care. She wanted training to become stronger. She didn't wish to watch others die for her when trouble happened again. Ethan genuinely hoped that she could pick up some self-defense skills, too. At the same time, he felt that the training was too intensive for her. He held a cigarette in his mouth as he sighed. The fact that things had come to this point was beyond his control. Even though he had meals and shared the bed with Olivia, she saw him as a roommate. There was no love in her gaze on Ethan, not even resentment. It was as if there was nothing else on her mind other than revenge. As though she didn't know about exhaustion, she got back to her feet right away. Olivia's eyes expressed determination. Again, don't hold yourself back. Mrs. Miller, you've achieved the target today. You should rest. The trainer gave up instead. Noticing her displeasure, Brent opened the door. Mrs. Miller, we found something. Only then did she give in. Okay, give me a moment. She stood up, heading to the bathroom to shower. Olivia casually hurled her dirty workout gear
into the basket. She stretched out her trembling right hand. Although it was difficult, she managed to hold the cup. She couldn't control the strength of her grasp, and her hand was still shaking. Still, a rare smile adorned across her lips the moment she held the cup. Her treatment was finally showing progress. She could move her right hand.
Chapter 555. Ethan reclined on the leather couch, slightly raising his head. He looked exhausted. Judging from his shut eyes, he seemed to be asleep. Olivia spared him a glance, and she didn't wake him up. She sat opposite him silently instead, casually taking a programming book. It was only when a cold wind came through the window that Ethan slowly woke up. Gazing at the cold scenery, he reckoned that it was going to snow soon. The light in the room was brightly lit, contradicting the somber sky outside. There were fresh flowers, which were brought over this morning, placed on the table. They were trimmed into lovely and graceful arrangements, giving off a faint, fresh scent. The apartment finally felt like home. However, no matter how wholesome the interior design was, it couldn't mend the relationship between Ethan and Olivia. Previously, only the weather outside would be described as cold. Now, their relationship itself had turned cold, too. Back in the past, she would definitely drape a blanket over him when he fell asleep. Unlike before, she didn't care about him now. She was sitting opposite him, reading a book. Her gaze was warm as tranquility sat upon her brows. You're awake. I heard that you've found something. There was no courtesy in her straightforward remarks. Ethan was now a tool to Olivia, and she didn't even try to hide that fact. To describe the situation with her words, he was repaying what he owed her. Yeah, I've asked someone to investigate all the Worlot streets. There are a total of 52 streets with that name in the whole country. Over 30 of them were either reconstructed, had their names changed, or under the government's use. It took a long time to look into them. Finally, we're certain that the place Mrs. Durst mentioned is located in Seaburg City. That is the good news. The bad news is that Seaburg City's geography is a little peculiar. It has been considered a strategic location during wars for a long time. It was bombed over 60 years ago, and then it was colonized by a foreign party for over 10 years. Worlot Street was changed into many names after that. 20 years ago, there was a huge reform and development project. Almost the whole city was reformed and reconstructed. That Worlot Street was long gone. Ethan took a stack of documents out. Previously, number 23 was an orphanage next to an old folks' home. It was a place catered for homeless children and old people. But that cherry tree was well preserved. Olivia took the documents over and read them seriously. It contained the history of Worlot Street from the 70s until today. It was like a history book. The black and white pictures gradually gained colors, showing the generational development. Finally, she stopped at a picture. Next to the cherry tree was an old folks' home and an orphanage. Even though it was a cold winter, it was clear that it was a huge tree. Apparently, it had lived for many years. It already snowed in Seaburg City. There were layers of snow on the surrounding buildings in the picture. Chapter 556. Olivia went out on the day of the first snow. She initially thought that the excessive training would worsen her illness, but it seemed like her stomach hadn't caused her trouble since before she got pregnant. Although she didn't know what was going on with the tumor, she was certain that her condition was stable. It didn't spread over her body, which was the best case scenario for her. It had been almost a year since she last went shopping or enjoyed life. Olivia stood before the most famous shopping center. She could see a career woman in heels from afar. Wearing a wool coat over her, the woman strode over with hurried steps. She stood under a large billboard and looked around until she heard a familiar voice. Eve. Everly turned to look back at Olivia, who was standing nearby in a black wool coat. The latter's hair, which was tied up, was longer than before. A pair of simple earrings hung on her earlobes. She still looked beautiful. Olivia was like a sunflower in the past and then appeared like a magnolia flower. Now, she was a black rose that had a cold exterior. She could only be looked at from afar. She wasn't someone to be messed with. Everly knew that Olivia hid to deliver her babies, so they hadn't kept in touch. She was overjoyed the moment she saw Olivia. Running in her heels, she threw herself at Olivia. You finally contacted me. Do you know how much I missed you? I was afraid of exposing your whereabouts, so I didn't dare to disturb you. I hadn't seen your babies, either. Not knowing how Olivia had been, Everly circled Olivia. You seem more energetic than before. Your complexion seems better. Not bad, not bad. I was surprised to see you a moment ago. You look the same, but you feel like a different person to me. Everly was overwhelmed with excitement, guessing that Olivia didn't bring her babies out due to their young age. I was over the moon when you gave me a call last night. Let's go. It's been a while since we last met. Let me show you how much my wealth has improved right now. Excited, she took Olivia to one of the most luxurious restaurants in the city. Everly didn't stop rambling throughout the journey, telling Olivia how she had been for the past year. She got a promotion to a much higher position after going on business trips abroad with Henry and was no longer an insignificant saleswoman. She spoke for more than half an hour until they arrived at the restaurant. Only when she took a sip of lemon water did she realize that Olivia had barely spoken. Olivia would only look at her with a smiling face or give a brief response. Everly finally stopped her stories, gazing at Olivia. Liv, you're kinda weird. The mothers in my office never stop talking about their children. Why don't you talk about yours? Oh, here are my gifts for them. She handed over a bag she had brought along, fishing out some golden accessories. Look, this is an anklet, bracelet, and zodiac necklace. They're solid. Olivia smiled faintly. Did you purchase them from a jeweler? Of course. These are for my godson and goddaughter. What are their names? I still don't know that. Olivia raised the pretty anklet, caressing the word, peace, carved in it. It was such a nice blessing. Gone. What's gone? Have you yet chosen a name for them? No rush. You can start with nicknames. That's how you get inspiration. Olivia's cold voice resounded. I said, my children are gone. The smile on Everly's face stiffened, but she was reluctant to think of the negative side. What do you mean by, gone? It means they've passed away. It was a preterm delivery, and they didn't survive. The bracelet fell off Everly's hand. Ha, how could this be? Your first child was gone. These babies, why a premature delivery? Olivia let out a bitter smile. It's a long story. Forget it. It's in the past. Liv. It's all right. It's in the past. Eve, I called you out today to bid farewell. Chapter 557. Surprised, Everly held Olivia's hand. Farewell. Where are you going? Don't worry. I simply wanna go somewhere to get some rest. Everly couldn't feel a sense of energy from Olivia's all-black outfit. Olivia was giving off an aloof demeanor. Everly figured that Olivia might want to get some fresh air. Are you going to be gone for a long time? Yeah, probably. Well, it's not bad to leave this saddening place. The positive Everly didn't even know how to comfort Olivia. What Olivia experienced wasn't something that could be placated with mere words. Converting anger and resentment into appetite might help, so Everly ordered a lot of expensive dishes. Eat. Have this caviar to your heart's content. You don't have to hold yourself back. I'm loaded with cash. Olivia smiled. Speak softer. People might think that you're a rich lady who lacks foresight. So what? I became rich with my capabilities. Liv, honestly speaking, I've always wanted to be successful and become someone you can rely on. You helped me out many times during high school. You're successful enough now." Olivia witnessed how much Everly grew. Unlike Olivia, Everly was a career-oriented woman. Men had held Everly back in the past. Now that she was single, she was on a roll. Everly finally found her desired path, and Olivia was genuinely happy for her. Like what they did during their schooling days, they had a meal, went shopping, and watched a movie. There was always a faint smile on Olivia's face. When the night dawned, snowflakes fluttered along the wind. They were going to go their separate ways when Everly suddenly said, "Wait." She entered a store. Soon, she came out of the store with a scarf and wrapped it around Olivia's neck. "No matter what path you choose to take, I'll always be supporting you. If you're tired, just look back because I'll be right behind you. Take care of yourself. Keep in touch when you're available. I'll be at ease if I know that you're doing fine." It took Olivia a while before saying, "Okay. Your body is weak, so don't push yourself too hard. You should give in when the situation calls for it. Leave it to the men." Olivia went silent for a moment again before responding, "Sure. Be happy." "Yeah, you too." Olivia wiped Everly's tears away. "Bye, Eve." Olivia hopped into the car before it drove off. She glanced behind only to see Everly standing at the same spot, watching her leave. Everly didn't leave. A cloud of melancholy tinged Olivia's eyes. "It's time to wrap things up over here," she thought. She decided to bid farewell to her past during this snowy winter. By the time Olivia returned home, Penny and Madame Burgess were discussing tomorrow's meal. Olivia headed back to her room to wash up. Looking at the snow outside, she exclaimed in her head, "Time does fly." It's been a year. Ethan entered the room to see her back. She was quiet, like a porcelain doll. "Have you really made up your mind?" "Yes. Actually, there's no need to rush. You can wait until it gets warmer in spring next year." She turned around. "There's no spring. Everywhere is hell to me. Ethan, if you truly love me, just let me go." He gulped his saliva. "You should know that Volt Peak Mountain is not an ordinary place. If you go there, I know, it's a dangerous place." She smiled. "But there's still a chance of surviving there. I will come back alive like you did that year." He stared at her for a long time before sighing helplessly. "I just don't know what to do with you. Ethan, could you do me one last favor?" Chapter 558. The next morning, Olivia entered Jeff's room one last time. She stared at the bedridden man, who was skin and bone. His muscles had shrunken, and his face was haggard. The pungent smell of medicine lingered in the air. Olivia didn't have the courage to enter the room before this. She was aware that the day she made up her mind would be the day she bid farewell. Thick layers of snow filled the yard after a snowy night. Olivia drew the thick curtains to open the window, letting the sunlight and wind in. "Dad, I bet it's been a long time since you last got some fresh air outside." "It's winter again. It's snowing." Although Olivia's right hand wasn't as sensitive as her left hand, she could make simple movements with it. She scooped the snow and began molding it into a snow rabbit. "I remember you'd always have snow fights and build a snowman with me in the yard whenever it snowed. Your craftsmanship is always on point. I once said that when you're old, I will push you in a wheelchair so that we can have a snow fight and build a snowman. But I guess we can't anymore. Dad, you've always been the young and handsome father to me. But today, I suddenly realize that you're already old. Your shoulders aren't as broad as before. It has been tough for you to come this far, right?" She cried while smiling. "Sorry for making you stay again and again because of my selfishness. I won't do the same now. I'm going to set you free, Dad." Her tears fell onto Jeff's face. "Actually, I found out that you're not my biological father some time ago. But so what? To me, you will always be my father. Even if you're no longer by my side, I will keep those memories I had with you and the lessons you taught me to guide me ahead." As she finished bidding farewell, the doctor swarmed the room. "Mrs. Miller." Tears pooled in her eyes as she said, "Do it." Someone switched the ventilator off while someone removed the tubes from Jeff one by one. Olivia placed the snow rabbit on Jeff's palm. "I love you, Dad." The warm sheen of sunlight caressed his palm, slowly melting the snow rabbit. His skinny fingers slightly tightened as though he was trying to hold the snow rabbit. A tear trickled down from the corner of his eye. It was his last farewell to Olivia. "You don't have to worry about me. I know what I'm going to do. I will live well." His heartbeat stopped, and there was a smile on his face. He finally let it go, and so did she. She should have done that earlier, but she made him stay. She was making him stay with no dignity until today. Ethan held her shoulder, cooing, "Don't be sad. I'm not. I'm happy. Jeff might have a new life soon." But Olivia hoped that he could live a happy life in his next lifetime. His funeral was a simple one. Only Olivia's close acquaintances knew about it. Her grandparents had passed away a long time ago. That made her uncles and aunts the only visitors. These relatives had cut ties with Olivia's family the moment they were announced bankrupt. Even though the relatives paid a visit to the funeral, none of them were genuine. They previously heard that she got married to someone in secret and spoke ill of her behind her back. They claimed that she had a filthy private life, messing around with men and getting married in the end because of pregnancy. Jeff didn't inform them because he was afraid that it would be an embarrassment. Now that they found out that Ethan was her ex-husband, they regretted it so much. They faked tears at the funeral, trying to get close to Olivia. However, Calvin and Brent got in their way before they could get closer to her. No one could come near her. Snowflakes were dancing in the air. She was dressed in black as Ethan stood next to her, holding an umbrella to shelter her from the snow. She knelt before the gravestone, praying again and again. "Dear God, may Jeff Fordham rest in peace and have his wish granted." Chapter 559. Marina, who was sitting in a wheelchair, watched Ethan hold an umbrella for Olivia from afar. He was standing while Olivia was kneeling. They somehow looked like a match made in heaven standing before the snowy background. Marina had asked him about Jeff's whereabouts many times, but he didn't tell her anything. It was only this morning that she received news about Jeff's death. She couldn't even see Jeff in his last moments or send him off for the one last time. She thought that Jeff didn't know that her biological daughter was her until his last day. Ethan was cruel, but he told her that this was her karma. But Marina didn't know what she did wrong. She was kept in the dark for so many years. In the end, she killed her parents with her bare hands. It pricked her guilty conscience day and night. During those days when she first returned to the country, she thought she was the happiest person in the world. She had a harmonious family, a loving mother, and a protective Ethan. Yet, she ended up like this a year later. The Carltons had experienced a huge change. Ethan called off their engagement, her parents passed away, and she became a disabled person. Marina asked someone to push her wheelchair toward Olivia. She looked at Olivia's pretty face, thinking, "This bitch is getting prettier." "Are you happy now?" Olivia, who was dwelling on grief, turned after hearing Marina's voice. Olivia's eyes were red. The sorrow in them faded away the moment she saw Marina. "Happy? Happy about what? About how Mom's condition worsened because you refused to donate your bone marrow for Mom even though it was a match? Or about how Dad was saved, but you made him relapse? You're the cause of all this. What do you want me to feel happy about?" It was all Marina's fault, and she was angered because Olivia exposed her. "You must have manipulated Ethan not to let me meet Dad. How cruel. You didn't even let me meet him in his last moments." Olivia merely sneered at Marina's rebuke, finding it a waste of time to explain her stance. Olivia wiped the tear away from the corner of her eye before rising to her feet. She then strode toward Marina and placed her hands beside her, caging her. Olivia's eyes were icy. "So what if I did that on purpose? I'm Dad's only daughter. You wish you could send him off one last time. You don't deserve to do so." Furious, Marina raised her hand to slap Olivia. A year ago, Marina could berate and hit Olivia, but the latter seemed to have changed into a different person now. Olivia grabbed Marina's hand easily. Olivia's left hand was more sensitive after the training. It was stronger than her right hand. Feeling that her wrist was going to snap, Marina turned and gave Ethan a pitiful look. "Ethan, look at her." The man, who had always sided with her, frowned. He looked at him with cold eyes. "Marina Carlton, I said not to cross the line. Stop testing my patience." "Ethan, How could you do this to me? How could I not? Keep in mind that I was never the person who owed you. He glared at her before holding the umbrella for Olivia to leave the place together. Marina threw herself at him like a mad woman, but she fell onto the snowy ground. The cold snow covered her face. She crawled forward like a dog, yelling, "Ethan, please. Look back at me. Can't you look at me just for once?" Chapter 560. Olivia stopped in her tracks to turn to look at Marina after hearing her despairing voice. Marina didn't care about the housekeeper, who was trying to help her up. She was so stubborn that she wanted to crawl toward Ethan. Her helpless and pitiful state reminded Olivia of her past. Olivia had once pleaded with Ethan not to divorce her. She now realized how pitiful she seemed at that time. "Are you going to let her be?" Olivia crossed her arms, assuming that Ethan ignored Marina because he was considering her emotions. "You don't have to mind me. It doesn't bother me." Ethan was hurt to hear that. He held Olivia's hand. "Liv, I have never loved Marina. I said I was going to marry her because I wanted to repay a favor." She sneered. "And that repayment requires you to have sex with her. Interesting. Liv, Connor's actually," when he was going to blurt that out, he closed his eyes only to recall the night he rescued Olivia from the sea. She almost died at that time, and it broke his heart to recall that again. He still didn't know who the mastermind that wanted to assassinate her was. If someone found out that Connor was actually Olivia's child, Connor would be in trouble. Thus, Ethan could only swallow the secret at the tip of his tongue. Olivia spared him a glance and left without waiting for his explanation. She would only need an explanation from him if she cared for him. She didn't, so why would she care about his emotions? Marina was getting closer to the couple, and yet they walked away, leaving her alone. She shouted at the top of her lungs, "Ethan!" She would never mention Kurt's matter in front of others. He was her last trump card. Although Ethan had called off his engagement with Marina, he didn't reduce his provision to the Carltons. He still looked after them. The Carltons' position was vulnerable now. Back then, Chris was around to keep things under control. Even though he didn't have a son, no one dared to lay a finger on them. Now that Chris had passed away and Marina was disabled, in addition to the called-off engagement, her relatives were getting restless. They didn't dare to set their plans into action solely due to Ethan's formidable influence. Marina was having a tough life. On the one hand, she had to please Ethan with caution. On the other hand, she had to bear the pressure from the Carltons. Snowflakes landed upon her. Her body was cold, but it couldn't beat the chill creeping into her heart. All Marina could do was to watch Ethan slowly walking farther and farther from her with sorrowful eyes. Olivia shoved Ethan's hand and got into the car alone. The heat in the car was warming her up. He handed her a hand warmer. "Your body is affected by the preterm delivery, so you can't be exposed to the cold. Warm yourself up." She caressed the hand warmer and said indifferently, "Send me to Volt Peak Mountain today. Liv, I can hire a professional to train you. You don't have to take it that far." She turned her head, gazing at him. "We can only awaken our potential on the brink of death. Even if you hire the best trainer for me, I will still be weak. If I weren't one step away from death, I would have thought that that was enough. But I witnessed how Mona died, how much she loved Warren. She loved him since they were still students. Even if he didn't like her, they must have at least formed a bond at a certain level after talking to each other every day. He didn't show a hint of hesitation when he raised his gun that day. He didn't even bat an eyelash. Only then did I realize that he isn't a human with emotions. He's an emotionless weapon. Kindness is the biggest hurdle in growth. I want to grow stronger, so I need to forsake these emotions. I won't have a weakness if I'm void of emotions. So, you personally sent your father off one last time to face a new chapter in life." She nodded. "Yes. Not even a miracle could save him. Instead of making him stay selfishly, it's better to set him free with dignity. That way, I won't have anything or anyone holding me back." The glint in Ethan's eyes wavered. "What about me? Liv, don't you care about me a single bit?" Olivia looked at the dancing snowflake outside, saying softly, "I don't love you anymore."